decentralized finance, which is a big kind of hot word right now.
Huge.
And it's just crazy. It is just insane, the stuff that's going on. I delved a little bit deeper into it because I didn't really even understand a lot of what was going on in it. Because there's these things called yield farms that are going on. And, if you go out there and start looking at this stuff, I mean, the rabbit hole goes really deep. And we're about to start talking about risks of this. And so this is some of the things I want to talk about. I want to keep you from making mistakes if you start looking into this stuff. Because right now you might look at some of these projects and think, man, this project's up 200% in the last week. Well, I mean, that's not necessarily a good thing because there are these things called yield farms, and there are all kinds of them. I'm not even going to name them because I don't want y'all to go look at them and think, oh, man, I got to get on that. But what they do is that you send them your money or you send them your Bitcoin, and they go out and they try to find the highest yield that they can get on your Bitcoin. The highest yield they can get.
Right.
So there are some that are paying like 100%, 200% per year on the yield from these things.
But they're not guaranteeing you
no
that yield.
exactly.
There's no guarantee
exactly.
yield.
That's what's
right.
Like I'm like, man, that's
but some
Vegas.
of that involves, if I'm thinking right, P2 like peer-to-peer lending. Essentially is what it is.
Yeah.
And so and then as people get in, they create a currency.
Yeah.
Just out of
thin air.
Ethereal.
Yeah.
Not Ethereum. And then off it goes. And suddenly, I mean, there's been some examples recently, the Yam and Yearn and all that just have gone crazy in terms of their value. But
and then crashed.
Like all things that you would expect that are, too good to be true, they are.
Vitalik Buterin today, who's the creator of Ethereum, he said something like, he said, be careful of these yield farming projects. He said some of these yield farming projects are making the central banks of the world look like Ron Paul's running them by how quickly they're creating more money. All these tokens that are being created. So it's really really pretty crazy. And
now maybe this segues into the risk part, but for me, looking at it again, sort of United States centric, is Bitcoin itself is more of a risky but interesting investment proposition that it is actual use of.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of Bitcoin, but I've not utilized my Bitcoin. I've been curious about actually using it to purchase something.
Yeah.
But the pizza guy story always scares me off of that.
Yeah,
so I'm
sure.
clinging tightly to it. But very different from other places. In other parts of the world, quite literally, that can be, whether they're there was a story, I think Charles Hoskinson, who's with the Cardano project, was talking about running across or coming across a guy in Inner Mongolia. He was a sheep herder or something out there, and he knew about Bitcoin and could transact.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you start thinking about what that means in other places. It's very different than what it means here. Here it's just, I mean, we can use money like we want to, but it's an investment proposition that you have to
and a hedge.
Be very
it's
a hedge.
It's a hedge,
Correct.
and it's very speculative. But I mean, it is in the broadest sense. It certainly is an investment because you are expecting it to go up, and there is the proposition, the value proposition of it is that it is a hedge against hyperinflation of a currency, and that it could, in some ways, become a monetary base that is recognized worldwide. And if enough people recognize it as that, the value could go way up.
Well, just type in Winklevoss twins and $500,000 Bitcoin. Type that in, not because I necessarily ascribe to what they're saying, but they're just giving sort of the outer limit of what they think could happen with a Bitcoin, but not just because it's Bitcoin, but in comparison to currencies and what our world goes through. Right. It's like in the United States. I mean, what choice really do we have in these disasters, in these epidemics and pandemics and things that strike our country out of the blue? What choice do we have? But there's always a consequence down the road for that of some kind. And Bitcoin is agnostic when it comes to that. It doesn't. That's not going to change. Nothing. There's not going to be a disaster that changes the value of that Bitcoin. Right,
unless you're talking about like a worldwide EMP or something like that. But even then, there are people that have nodes in protected places where even if you had an EMP, it would take a while to build back. And
so I think that's a fair question to
Yeah.
say the only thing that I know that's a killer for all cryptocurrency, because if I was just somebody listening and going, well, wait a second, what happens if the internet goes down?
Yeah.
Like not just, in the bank where the IT guy
Yeah.
can get it straight here.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that guy.
Yeah.
I mean, like across the United
Yeah, the
States
world,
and
yeah.
then across the world. What happens if internet goes away? And we
Right.
can't really fathom that, but
Right.
it could happen.
Yeah, yeah, right, right. And you could, in theory, it's like it's layer two solutions. And so, when you think about gold as a currency, what happens if you can't get to the gold that your third party holder is holding for you today? Well, you could have a digital version of gold, but you could also have paper versions of gold, which is what we had for a while on the gold standard.
Right.
And so you could have layer two solutions that are low tech. Is I guess what I'm saying. You could have technically a paper Bitcoin, that you could now. Of course, if they don't have a device that they could use to access it, then it doesn't really matter.
Well,
But,
sure. I mean, there's lots of people in the transition to technology still keep a paper. Like in my files, I scan everything in to my computer, but I still have my hard file.
Yeah,
So
right.
if my server goes down and is wiped out, I've got my hard file that's
Right.
got most of my stuff in it. But the reality of it is, if we're hit with, I guess, with a worldwide EMP or something
Got
like
worse
that
things to
happens, we
worry
got
about
way
than-
worse
Yeah.
problems worrying.
Then how much Bitcoin?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And so, there are things that risks that you need to be aware of. Certainly, when considering whether you wanted to invest in something like this, and there are regulatory risks. So the governments haven't been very loving toward Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies because there has been misconceptions about some of the uses of it, and some people have used it for bad stuff. There's no doubt about that. And they do have some ability to crack down on the usage of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. But I think at this point, to me, it's pretty much too far gone. The genie's out of the bottle at this point with it. I don't think they would even try really to completely shut it down. I think they may try to regulate it more, but I don't think they would be able to shut down, Bitcoin particularly. I think it's more resistant probably to.
So, what happens if the United States were to make their own digital version of the dollar? China's working on that right now. Russia's working on that right now. What happens? Do you need Bitcoin if the United States makes its digital dollar?
Yeah, I mean, I think you still do, especially if the monetary policy is the same. Now, if they adopted the Bitcoin monetary policy, then yeah, you wouldn't need it. That's the only way they could really kill it.
Meaning what?
Meaning that they would agree, and I don't know how you could even be sure that they would. The only way they could really do it is if they said, okay, we're gonna create the U.S. dollar digital, and we're gonna decentralize the network like Bitcoin, and we're gonna build into the code an inflation rate, and we're gonna relinquish control of it. If they did that, then it would be Bitcoin. I mean, or it would be something similar to Bitcoin. It would be
Right.
provably scarce. It would have an inflation rate that's completely predictable, and and then you
Well, it can't be manipulated,
it
right?
couldn't be manipulated. So they're not going to do that.
Right, exactly,
So-
because it prevents them from even sort of legitimately manipulating,
Yeah.
as in a natural disaster.
Right.
But you again multiply that across whether it's the Philippines or Venezuela. I keep picking on Venezuela.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, sure.
The same thing where they do manipulate their currency.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, I think you still have the same currency problem. And they're never going to give up that control. Any government is not likely to do that. Even with China's version, is not going to do that.
Yeah, no, they're not going to. Venezuela, I think Venezuela issued the
Petro.
petrodollar
Yeah.
or whatever it is, but they still had control over it. So that's the thing. I remember watching a Vanguard. Vanguard is one of my favorite companies, by the way. But they did a video and they talked about, well, as soon as the U.S. digitizes the dollar, then Bitcoin's just dead. I'm like, no, not at all, not even a little bit.
And there was a tremendous amount of fundamental misunderstanding by some very smart people
Yeah,
initially. But I
absolutely.
think you're correct that the genie is out of the bottle. Now, whether they regulate, how they react to it at this point,
Yeah.
what sort of controls they attempt, which is going to be very difficult,
Yeah.
or I guess controlling its usage in some way, shape, or form. But it's you've got some people now that in highly placed in the government that do understand it and understand its value.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't, anything is possible, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very difficult for them to
Sure.
shut this thing down.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so far gone, and I think
impossible. Yeah.
it's impossible, and I think it would be counterproductive because if I think we're at a point now where there's going to be just from a game theory perspective, and what I mean by that is just incentives. Like if a country became very adversarial to cryptocurrency, and another country embraced it, they would have a huge advantage. The country that embraced it, because there's so much value to be had in these projects, I think. And if you don't embrace it, I mean, you're gonna it's gonna hurt your country, I think. At this point, just because there's so many efficiencies that can be gotten from these projects, and if you try to shut them out, I just think it would be counterproductive to the country itself. I hope that's the case anyway. Maybe I don't know that they would recognize it, but I think that would be the case.